In her essay, Nature's Queer Performativity, Karen Barrett challenges traditional distinctions between nature and culture, human and non human, and matter and meaning. Drawing on queer theory, feminist theory, post humanism, and quantum physics, Barrett argues that nature itself is active, creative, and performative. Rather than viewing performativity as a uniquely human capacity, she proposes that all matter participates in an ongoing processes of becoming. The essay develops a radical understanding of reality in which identities, boundaries, and meanings emerge through relationships and interactions rather than existing beforehand. Barrett begins by examining the idea of acts against nature, a phrase commonly used to condemn certain sexual practices. She points out a contradiction in this expression. Humans are portrayed as acting against nature from the outside, but those same actions are often condemned because they supposedly reduce humans to the level of animals. This logic depends on maintaining a strict separation between nature and culture, but the distinction repeatedly collapses. Meanwhile, genuinely destructive actions against animals and ecosystems, such as industrial slaughter, are normalized rather than treated as crimes against nature. These contradictions reveal the instability of the nature culture divide. A major target of Barrett's critique is human exceptionalism, the belief that humans are fundamentally separate from and superior to non human beings. Traditional theories of performativity, particularly within queer theory, focus almost entirely on human subjects. While such theories challenge fixed identities, they often leave intact the assumption that humans are the primary agents of meaning and action. This perspective is insufficient because the very distinction between human and non human is itself produced through material practices. Rather than beginning with already existing humans and non humans, we should investigate how these categories come into being. To develop this argument, Barrett introduces her theory of agential realism. According to agential realism, entities do not pre exist their relationships. Instead, they emerge through what she calls intra-action. Unlike interaction, which assumes independent entities that later come into contact, intra-action suggests that entities are formed through their relations. Reality is composed not of separate objects but of phenomena, dynamic entanglements of matter and meaning. Boundaries between subjects and objects are not fixed, they are temporarily produced through what Barrett called agential cuts, which create distinctions within an ongoing web of relations. This perspective leads Barrett to rethink identity. Identity is not an inherent property of individuals but an effect of ongoing processes of differentiation. Difference is not something that exists between already formed entities, rather, entities themselves emerge through acts of differentiation. Humans, animals, objects, and environments are all entangled in process of becoming. Reality is characterized by space time mattering, a concept emphasizing that space, time, and matter are co produced rather than existing independently. To illustrate nature's performativity, Barrett introduces a series of queer critters. These examples demonstrate that non human beings and processes exhibit behaviors that challenge conventional assumptions about identity, causality, and communication. The first example is lightning. Lightning is often imagined as a discharge traveling from cloud to ground. However, scientific studies reveal a more complex process. The cloud sends downward electrical signals while the ground simultaneously sends upward responses. A lightning strike occurs when these signals meet. Barrett emphasizes that neither the sender nor receiver can be clearly identified beforehand. Instead, lightning revolves a strange form of communication in which the participants emerge through the process itself. This phenomenon challenges linear models of causality and demonstrates that nature actively participates in relational performances. The second example concerns neuronal receptor cells in stingrays. Research suggests that receptor cells sometimes prepare themselves for signals before those signals arrive. This behavior appears to blur distinction between cause and effect, sender and receiver. Barad uses this case to highlight forms of communication that cannot be explained by straightforward linear causality. The stingray example suggests that biological systems may operate through complex relational dynamics that exceed traditional scientific models. A third example is Fiesteria piscicida, a microscopic dinoflagellate associated with massive fish kills. Scientists have struggled to determine exactly what Fiesteria is because its characteristics change dramatically depending on environmental conditions. Some researchers view this uncertainty as a lack of knowledge, but Barrett discusses the work of scholars who argue that the uncertainty is ontological rather than merely epistemological. In other words, Fiesteria itself is inherently indeterminate. Its identity cannot be separated from its relationships with fish, water conditions, and other organisms. The organism exists only through its entanglements, demonstrating that species identities are not fixed but dynamically constituted. Barrett then turns to quantum physics, which provides some of her most powerful evidence against classical notions of reality. The phenomenon of the quantum leap, in which an electron moves from one energy level to another without passing through intermediate positions. Such jumps challenge ordinary ideas of continuity, causality, and spatial location. Quantum events suggest that change does not simply occur through pre existing space and time. Instead, space and time themselves are implicated in the process of becoming. The essay's most famous scientific example is the quantum eraser experiment. This experiment builds on the classic double slit experiment, which demonstrates that particles such as electrons can behave as either waves or particles depending on how they are measured. The quantum eraser experiment shows that information about a particle's path can be erased after the particle has already passed through the apparatus. Remarkably, this later action affects the pattern observed. Some physicists interpret this result as changing the past. Barrett offers a different interpretation. The experiment reveals that the past was never fully fixed in the first place. Past and future are continually reconfigured through ongoing material practices. Reality is not composed of independent events unfolding in linear time, but of entangled phenomena in which temporal boundaries remain open. Throughout the essay, Barrett connects these scientific insights to ethical and political concerns. If identities and boundaries are produced through entanglements, then responsibility cannot be limited to individual actors. Ethics requires accountability for the ways distinctions are drawn and for the exclusions they produce. Human beings are not detached observers of nature, but participants within a shared world of ongoing materialization. Barrett argues that nature is fundamentally queer, not merely because some organisms display unusual behaviors, but because reality itself resists fixed identities, stable boundaries, and linear causality. Lightning, stingrays, dinoflagellates, atoms, and humans all demonstrate that existence is relational, dynamic, and indeterminate. Through her concept of agential realism, Barrett proposes a posthumanist ontology in which matter is active, performative, and continually engaged in processes of becoming. Nature is not a passive background for human action, but an active participant in the ongoing creation of the world.